You're so predictable, you know that? My husband said. And I noticed the way his voice tilted just loud enough for Alexis to hear across our end of the table. She's been running spreadsheets in her head all evenings instead of actually being present. That's the fundamental difference between you two. He smiled at his girlfriend, at our table, at a charity gala I had organized for 3 months. Like I was furniture he'd long since learned to step around. Alexis understands what it means to actually live. You just audit life. I smoothed the edge of my napkin against the tablecloth. That's useful information, I said. By 10:45 that night, Alexis was in an examination room at St. Christopher's Medical Center, with results that would require her to contact every intimate partner she'd had in the past 60 days. My husband sat in the waiting area in his rented tuxedo, making calls that went to voicemail. My friend Paige had been guided out through the service entrance by 2 event staff who wanted to avoid a scene. My friend Britta had excused herself to the ladies' room 20 minutes earlier, and simply not come back. The attending physician who processed their intake had my cell number saved in her phone. I drove home with the windows down. October air in Portland doesn't apologize for being cold. I noticed the money before I noticed the women. That's the forensic accountant in me. I've spent 14 years helping companies and law firms untangle financial deception. Hidden accounts, falsified invoices, asset transfers designed to look like ordinary business expenses. I can read a credit card statement the way a cardiologist reads an EKG. Patterns emerge before details do, and the pattern is always cleaner than the story the person is trying to tell on top of it. My husband's patterns started shifting 8 months before the gala. Small things first. An Uber charge on a Tuesday afternoon to a Pearl District address. A recurring dinner receipt at a restaurant he'd never mentioned to me. Always Wednesday evenings. Always for 2. A hotel charge in Bend for a weekend he'd described as a pharmaceutical conference. I didn't confront him. I did what I always do when I find an anomaly. I opened a new folder on my encrypted drive and started documenting. By the time I found the group text thread, by accident, genuinely by accident, his phone face up on the kitchen counter while he showered. I already had 8 months of financial evidence organized by date, category, and cross-reference. The thread was named with what I assumed they believed was the practical ones. It included my husband, Alexis, Paige, and Britta. I read 6 weeks of messages in 11 minutes. Paige had been my closest friend since graduate school. We'd trained for a half marathon together in our early 30s. I'd sat with her in a hospital waiting room for 6 hours when her mother had a stroke. In the thread she referred to me as the calculator. Not with malice. Worse than malice, with the easy familiarity of a nickname everyone had agreed on long ago. Britta had been my maid of honor. She was the one who'd introduced me to my husband 9 years ago at a rooftop party she'd planned. In the thread she'd shared a photo from my last birthday dinner. Me leaning forward to blow out candles, eyes closed, and captioned it "She has no idea." There were 17 laughing emoji responses. My husband had sent a follow-up, completely clueless. "It's almost too easy." Alexis had written back, "You deserve someone who actually sees you, babe." I set the phone exactly as I'd found it, face up, angled slightly toward the sink. Then I went to my home office and closed the door, and sat in my chair and cried. Not for long, maybe 12 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on my computer screen, in the way that you do when you're waiting for something to be over. It was the hard, ugly kind of crying that happens when you've been holding something in your chest for months, without fully recognizing how much it weighed. 12 minutes, then I washed my face, then I opened my laptop and started working. What they didn't know, what my husband had never known in 9 years of marriage, was that I had been quietly building something entirely separate from our shared life. I started 3 years into the marriage, not out of suspicion, but out of professional instinct. I'd watched too many clients' lives come undone in divorce proceedings, because one spouse had controlled all the financial accounts. I'd seen women in their 50s with nothing liquid, dependent on the generosity of men who'd already emotionally left years before the paperwork. I decided that would never describe me. The first investment trust was modest, $45,000 from a freelance consulting engagement, deposited into a separate LLC account I'd set up under my maiden name. Over the years I added methodically. Real estate limited partnerships. A dividend reinvestment portfolio that I rebalanced quarterly. A small commercial property in Salem that I co-owned with a college friend through a holding company with no trace of my married name attached to it. By the time I read those text messages, the combined trust held $2.1 million in fully documented, separately acquired assets, all established before or independent of this marriage. All protected under Oregon's separate property law. My husband believed I maintained a comfortable salary and a modest savings account because I had never told him otherwise. And he had never thought to ask. Men who decide their wives are mere calculators rarely imagine the calculations they're not being shown. Dr. Miranda Kim had been one of the most respected internists in the Pacific Northwest before she reported her hospital's billing department for Medicare fraud 3 years earlier. The hospital's legal team responded by burying her in retaliatory complaints until her reputation in institutional medicine was unsalvageable. Her license survived, her career in hospital systems did not. She'd been doing private consulting work, corporate health screenings, executive physicals, when a mutual colleague connected us. We met at a coffee shop in Northwest Portland with mismatched chairs and a barista who remembered regulars. She looked like someone who had been tired for a long time and had gotten skilled at functioning inside that tiredness. I slid the Gala event program across the table. Portland Children's Hospital Foundation benefit. I've been on the planning committee for 3 years. This year I volunteered to coordinate the corporate wellness component. Complimentary health screenings, blood pressure checks, basic metabolic panels, standard fundraiser feature. She read the program. All legitimate. Completely. I want everything done properly, documented by the book. I just want the team to be yours, and I want the full standard panel, not the abbreviated corporate version. She looked at me steadily. The full panel includes STI screening. When someone opts in for complete blood work, yes. And you expect certain attendees to opt in. I expect people who brand themselves as wellness forward to find it difficult to decline a complimentary comprehensive health screening. In front of 300 colleagues. I picked up my coffee. It would look inconsistent with their personal narratives. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means someone is deciding how much of themselves to put into something. I know people, Shai said, nurses, lab techs. People who were pushed out for being accurate when accuracy was inconvenient. She closed the program. I can put together a team. I maintained everything exactly as it had been. I made his coffee each morning. I attended 2 more planning meetings for the gala, and sat next to Britta and took notes on centerpiece arrangements and silent auction logistics. Paige texted me about a new yoga studio opening, and I responded with a thumbs up. I sat across the dinner table from my husband and listened to him describe Alexis's growing Instagram following. She's really building something. It's genuinely impressive. With the expression of a woman who found this mildly interesting. 3 weeks before the gala, I sat across from my attorney, Holloway, who had been recommended to me by 3 sources, and who had the particular quality of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by any of it. Separate property documentation is solid, she said, reviewing the file. Oregon is equitable distribution, not community property. Given the timeline and structure, he'll have a very difficult time making a legitimate claim on any of the trust assets. The commercial property co-ownership under the holding LLC is even cleaner. I thanked her and went home and made dinner. The night before the gala, my husband sat on the edge of our bed, checking his phone with the careful casualness of a man who thinks he's being subtle. He'd been carrying an anticipation quiet for a week. Not guilt. Something closer to excitement held slightly in check. "You're coming tomorrow night, right?" he asked without looking up. "I organized half of it," I said. "Right." He set the phone face down on the nightstand. "I just know these events aren't really your thing." I looked at his reflection in the mirror while I took out my earrings. This man who knew I took melatonin at 10 and kept the thermostat at 68 and couldn't tolerate the television during dinner. Who had cataloged all those known things and decided they added up to a person not worth keeping. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. The Multnomah Athletic Club's rooftop terrace in October requires standing heat lamps and produces, with the downtown Portland skyline behind it, the kind of atmosphere that makes people believe their lives are going exactly as intended. 312 guests. Black tie. The donated auction items that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And everyone speaking about impact and community while drinking craft cocktails. Dr. Kim's team had the wellness booth positioned near the terrace entrance, framed by 2 potted olive trees and clean signage. Complete health screening. Know your numbers. Navy scrubs, the foundation's logo, professional and approachable, the kind of setup that says this is routine, this is responsible, this is what health-conscious people do. I watched Alexis arrive, with what I later learned was her social media manager. She'd brought her social media manager to a charity gala. And immediately brightened when she spotted the wellness booth. She had built her entire platform around biohacking and functional medicine, and posting her morning blood panel results for her 620,000 followers. Declining a free comprehensive screening at a public health event would have been, for her personal brand, an act of self-sabotage. She was at the intake table, within 20 minutes of arriving. Paige, who taught hot yoga and sold a line of adaptogenic supplements, followed when she noticed Alexis heading over. Being the person in a wellness-adjacent crowd who skipped the health screening was not consistent with how she needed to be perceived. Britta came by after the cocktail hour, relaxed and sociable, and chatted with the intake nurse for several minutes about her recent anti-inflammatory eating reset, before rolling up her sleeve. My husband went through the screening, because Alexis asked him to, and because he had, in the way of people who have never faced serious consequences, a bone-deep belief that nothing would actually happen to him. I was standing near the silent auction tables when I saw Alexis check her phone. The expression that moved across her face wasn't readable to most people in that room. To me, it was a line item that didn't reconcile. Her eyes went flat. She looked up and scanned the terrace until she found my husband, and the look she gave him was a question he didn't understand yet. He excused himself from the conversation he was in and crossed to her. They spoke in low tones for about 90 seconds, then he checked his phone. Then, across the room, Paige checked hers. Britta was standing near the dessert station when whatever she read turned all the color out of her face. She sat down, on the edge of a cocktail chair that wasn't positioned for sitting, and her elbow caught a small, floral arrangement on the adjacent table. The crash wasn't loud, but it had the quality of sounds that make a room briefly recalibrate. The people nearby turned to look. Then looked again, because the woman sitting there had the expression of someone whose internal machinery had seized. 2 event staff reached her before I could. "I need to leave right now," she said to them, and her voice was nothing like her usual voice. All the professional warmth drained out of it. Something rawer and smaller underneath. They guided her toward the side exit that led to the service elevator. Paige made it to the ladies' room. I gave her a few minutes and then went to check, because I had known her for 17 years. I found her sitting on the marble tile floor with her back against the vanity counter, her phone in her lap, not crying, just staring at the wall across from her with the expression of someone whose operating system has crashed and is waiting for a reboot that isn't coming. She looked up when I came in. For a moment I thought she was going to say something that was actually true. Something that cut through all the months of text threads and laughing emoji. Then she said, quietly, "I don't feel well. I think I need to go home." "I'll get your coat," I said. My husband found me by the coat check 20 minutes later. "Something came up," he said. His voice had the controlled flatness of a man working very hard to contain the scale of what was happening. "Alexis isn't feeling well. I need to take her. It's a medical situation." "I hope she's okay," I said. He looked at me in a way he hadn't looked at me in years. Actually looked like he was trying to read something he'd never thought to read before. Then he left. I went back to the terrace. The string quartet was playing something I recognized but couldn't name. I stayed through the end of the program, thanked the foundation board members I'd spent 3 months working alongside, and personally thanked Dr. Kim's team before they packed up their equipment. At 11:15 I collected my coat tipped the valet, and drove home alone. Dr. Kim called at 9:40 the following morning. The complete panel results flagged gonorrhea in 4 individuals, she said. All 4 have been contacted through proper medical channels, consistent with Oregon public health reporting requirements. They've each been advised to notify all sexual partners within the relevant window. And my panel? Completely clear, negative across all markers. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat with my coffee for a moment. There was a feeling of something settling, not the satisfaction I'd expected, something quieter. The feeling of a long calculation that finally resolves to the number the data always suggested it would. Oregon's public health notification requirements are not optional, and they are not discreet. They are, by design, thorough. Alexis's husband, the one she had not mentioned in 3 years of Instagram content about manifesting her ideal life, received his notification while at work. He drove directly to her apartment and removed, among other things, approximately $14,000 in camera equipment and lighting gear. Her brand management company called before she'd had time to draft a statement. The supplement partnership she'd been building for a year sent a termination email with the subject line, Brand Safety Review. The activewear collaboration she'd been publicly teasing released a statement about pausing the relationship pending further review. By Thursday, her follower count had dropped 40,000. The following week, it dropped another 65,000. She posted nothing for 11 days. Paige's yoga studio operated on the particular social economy of a close-knit neighborhood community, where information moved through a text chain faster than any algorithm. Her lease came up for renewal the following month. Her landlord decided not to renew. Britta's event planning business ran almost entirely on referrals in a city where professional networks were significantly smaller than they appeared. At rooftop charity galas, she had 2 client cancellations within the week. 7 by the end of the month. My husband's company had a conduct clause in his employment contract. These things are, in the pharmaceutical industry, more consistently enforced than most people realize, until it's relevant to them. The divorce petition arrived 3 weeks after the gala. His attorney, a Seattle specialist named Aldridge, had filed something ambitious: the marital home, 60% of joint investment accounts, and what the document described as appropriate spousal support. Given my husband's current professional disruption. The language was confident in the way that language is when someone doesn't yet know what information exists on the other side of the table. Holloway submitted our response at the preliminary hearing with 419 pages of documentation. The trust, the real estate limited partnerships, the Salem commercial property under the holding LLC, every asset registry with verified establishment dates, all separately acquired, all documented, all untouched by marital funds, all protected under Oregon law. She then presented 8 months of my husband's credit card records, organized by date and cross-referenced against his stated schedule: the hotel in Bend, the Wednesday dinners, the Uber charges to the Pearl District address. Financial patterns, as I have always found, tell complete and accurate stories when you have enough data points and the patience to let them speak. The attorney on the other side asked for a recess. The marital home sold 8 weeks later. I took my half in a wire transfer and didn't attend the closing. My husband relocated to a rental in Tigard. The job market in his industry shared personnel information with the efficiency of a well-maintained database. I moved into a condo on the 14th floor of a building in the South Park blocks. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view of the West Hills that changed completely depending on cloud cover, and the angle of the light, which I found I preferred to any fixed view. Static things had started to seem like a personality flaw to me. Dr. Kim and I have dinner the last Thursday of every month, at a Peruvian restaurant on Burnside, where the cocktails are made with actual care, and the lighting is low enough for honest conversation. She's working with a legal team building a case as against the hospital administration that dismantled her career. I'm helping them untangle the financial documentation. It turns out that when you spend years being called a calculator, you develop a very specific skill. The ability to work carefully, thoroughly, and without anyone paying enough attention to see the full scope of what you're actually doing. I ran into Britta once, 6 months after everything, at a coffee shop in the Alberta Arts District. She saw me first. I watched the small recalibration in her posture. The half-second decision of whether to acknowledge me or find a reason to pivot. And then she crossed the room and stood in front of me. Which I will give her credit for. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, she said. You don't, I agreed. She stood there then. I didn't think it would end this way. I thought about telling her what I actually believed about that statement, that the ending was structural, embedded in the choices that preceded it, that the trajectory was calculable from the first decision forward, and had never required any particular intervention from me to arrive where it did. But I had a full afternoon of work ahead, and a coffee getting cold on the table behind me. Most people don't, I said, and I wished her well, and meant it, because holding on to the opposite would have cost me energy I'd rather spend elsewhere, and I left. The thing about being called a calculator for 9 years is that you eventually stop experiencing it as an insult. A calculator doesn't rationalize. It doesn't look away from inconvenient numbers, or adjust the formula to produce a more comfortable result. It runs every input through the same process and delivers whatever the data actually says. Whether that's the answer you wanted or the answer you were trying to avoid. They built their whole strategy on the assumption that I was too absorbed in the numbers to notice what was being stolen right beside me. They forgot that noticing is exactly what numbers are for.